my stepdaughter said. Be grateful they even let you sit in the hall at my wedding. The next day I canceled the payment for the celebration, and the groom disappeared. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now let's get started. You're not our dad. Riley's voice was sharp, dismissive, the kind of statement meant to end a conversation before it began. He was 18, tall enough to stare at me eye to eye, but still with the posture of a boy who thought the world owed him patience simply because of his age. Madison, 16, didn't echo him, but she didn't need to. She folded her arms and smirked, leaning closer to him like an ally in a war I hadn't realized was declared. That was the night Ashley and I told the kids we were getting married. It was supposed to be a celebration, a joining of lives, of families. My children, Nora, 12, and Josh, 10, had been nervous but excited. Nora even asked Madison if she wanted to share her art supplies, trying to offer something small, something fragile, as if generosity could plant the seed of sisterhood. Josh followed Riley around, hoping to be noticed, to be treated like a younger brother. But Riley brushed him off, saying he had no time for little kids. Madison rolled her eyes and muttered, "This is so dumb," as though the entire evening was an inconvenience forced upon her. Ashley laughed nervously, trying to smooth the moment over. "They'll adjust," she whispered later, when the teenagers stomped upstairs and slammed their doors. I wanted to believe her. I told myself patience was the answer, that kindness could build bridges where blood could not. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I paid enough, if I carried enough weight, the day would come when they would look at me and not see an intruder in their lives. I paid for everything. School fees, sports teams, clothes Riley demanded had to be name brands, Madison's endless dance classes, the trips Ashley insisted would bring us closer. I told Madison once, offhand, that I had even started setting aside money for her wedding someday. For a flicker of a second, her eyes lit up. Then Riley muttered, "Don't bother. You're not part of it." She laughed with him. It was a laugh that burned more than any outright insult. Still, I persevered. I thought they're just teenagers. They don't understand what I'm building. But my children, my blood, understood perfectly well. Nora once asked me, timidly, "Dad, why do Riley and Madison never listen to you when you pay for all their things?" She said it quietly, as though she was ashamed to notice. Josh, too young to hide his anger, snapped at dinner one evening, "Why do you always give them stuff? They don't even like you." I silenced him with a look, but inside I felt the truth of his words. The warning signs were everywhere. Small moments, sharp and cutting, that piled up until they became impossible to ignore. Like the way Madison would wait for Ashley to repeat everything I said before she would move. If I asked her to clean her plate, she'd stare at me, blank, until Ashley repeated the same words. Then she'd do it, but only because her mother's voice had sanctified the request. Or the way Riley left his things scattered across the house. Shoes in the hallway, half-eaten food on the counter. And when I asked him to clean up, he would sneer. Dad would have said it differently. Dad, his biological father, the man who appeared once a year with half-hearted promises and disappeared just as quickly. That ghost of a man had more power in Riley's mouth than I did standing in front of him, paying the bills. Every month, their attitude grew colder. Every month, my children grew more aware of the imbalance. They saw me give and give, while Riley and Madison mocked or ignored me. They saw Ashley, my wife, too often silent, too often trying to excuse it away. One evening, I came home late from work. I had driven 2 hours to make it to Nora's recital, only to find that Riley and Madison had refused to attend. They told Ashley, "He's not our dad. We don't need to sit through this boring kid stuff." Ashley didn't press them. She came with me, smiled, and clapped, but the empty seats beside her were like wounds. Nora asked afterward, "Why didn't they come?" I told her they were busy. She didn't believe me. There was also the night I stayed up late fixing Riley's computer. Hours spent on drivers, wires, troubleshooting until my eyes blurred. In the morning, Riley walked past it, didn't thank me, didn't even look at me. He told his mother, "Thanks for getting Dad to fix it," as if I were some hired technician who had been ordered around. And Madison, she had a crueler way. Subtle but cutting. She would post pictures online from the trips I funded, carefully cropping me out. She would tag Ashley, tag Riley, even tag Nora and Josh, but never me. Once, when I asked her why, she said with a shrug, "It just doesn't feel right. You're not really family." That night, Josh cried. He had seen the pictures too. "Why don't they like you, Dad? Why don't they like us?" What could I say? That sometimes the more you give, the more invisible you become? I swallowed my anger, my shame, and told myself again, patience. I thought time would teach them that love, even when not returned, would eventually wear down the walls they kept building. But the cracks grew wider. Ashley tried, in her own way. She reminded them to respect me, told them I worked hard, told them I was there when no one else was. But her voice was soft, too soft. They listened to her only when it served them. And when she was quiet, as she often was, they filled the silence with their disdain. I began to notice the small humiliations. The way Riley would walk into the kitchen, glance at the food I had cooked, and ask Ashley, "Is this safe to eat?" The way Madison would complain to her mother about my rules, but never to my face. The way both of them spoke across me, as though I wasn't even there. And yet I kept paying. I kept funding their activities, their clothes, their futures. I kept telling myself that if I gave them the life they wanted, eventually they would recognize me as something more than a wallet. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They didn't want a stepfather. They wanted me to disappear. And each time I looked into Nora's eyes, each time I saw Josh watching me with confusion and hurt, I realized something dangerous was happening. They were learning from me. Learning that love meant silence, that sacrifice meant humiliation, that being a father meant letting yourself be erased. And that, perhaps, was the first betrayal I could not forgive. Not Riley's words, not Madison's smirks, not Ashley's silence, but my own willingness to let my children believe this was normal. That was the first warning sign, the one that whispered to me in the quiet of the night, "If you keep this up, you will not only lose their respect, you will lose your own children's respect too." Madison always made sure to remind me where the boundaries lay. Even in the smallest things, she found ways to cut me down. If I set the table, she would walk into the kitchen and ask, "Mom, do we really have to eat this?" As though my food required Ashley's blessing before it was fit for her mouth. She never said it to me directly, always through her mother, like I was invisible. Riley was bolder. He left his mess across every room. The shoes in the hall, empty glasses in the living room, a trail of dirty laundry like breadcrumbs. If I told him to clean it up, he'd sneer. Dad wouldn't have said it like that. That, his biological father, who had been a ghost in their lives for years. Somehow, his absence carried more weight than my constant presence. At first, I tried to treat these things as typical teenage defiance. But it wasn't defiance, it was dismissal. Not rebellion against authority, but denial that I had any authority to begin with. And Ashley, though she claimed to want harmony, fed into it. Every time they ignored me, she repeated my words. "Listen to him," she'd say softly, apologetically. They obeyed her, never me. It was a humiliating dance, a ritual of erasure. Dinner was the worst. I would cook, set the table, pour drinks. They would eat quickly, phones in hand, hardly looking up. Riley once said, loud enough for Nora and Josh to hear, "At least when Dad cooked, it wasn't burned." His father had never cooked them a meal in his life. But Riley's lie cut deeper because Ashley stayed silent. My children noticed. Nora's eyes lowered to her plate, her fork moving slowly, shame on her face for me. Josh slammed his drink down and muttered, "At least Dad shows up." Riley laughed, a dry, cruel laugh that echoed in my chest long after dinner ended. It escalated slowly, like water rising in a room. I told myself to endure, to keep giving, keep funding, keep showing them what real commitment looked like. Maybe, one day, they would see the difference between a father who abandoned them and a man who stayed. But they didn't see. They refused. Madison grew more daring. She would plan events and deliberately leave me out. One evening, she was discussing her dance showcase with Ashley. "I'll need rides, money for costumes, And someone to record the performance, she said. Ashley turned to me. Naturally, I was the one who provided all of that. But Madison looked at me like I was a stranger and added, "Not him, just you, Mom." I swallowed the humiliation, paid for the costumes, recorded the performance, drove her there and back, all while my own children sat quietly in the back seat, watching their father humiliate himself in service of a girl who had already decided he was nothing. Then came the wedding. Ashley was ecstatic. Madison, just 16, had fallen into a whirlwind romance with a boy from school. He was earnest, nervous, the kind of young man who thought love could conquer anything. Ashley clung to the idea that planning a wedding, even a small one, would finally bring us all together. She said it would be a family project. I paid without hesitation. Banquet hall, photographer, flowers, music. Thousands upon thousands poured from my accounts into Madison's future. I told myself it was proof that I wasn't just a stepfather, but a man willing to treat her like my own. The planning was relentless. Madison barked orders at her mother, at me, at everyone. Riley acted as her shield, mocking me when I made suggestions. "Stay out of it," he said once, smirking. "You're not her dad." I should have walked away then, but I didn't. The breaking point came during the wedding rehearsal. The banquet hall was filled with guests. Family friends, Ashley's relatives, even my colleagues who had heard me brag about the event, proud of what I thought I was building. I stood near the aisle, adjusting my tie, waiting for Madison to enter. She walked in with her fiancé, holding his hand, smiling as though she had already won the world. People clapped. I clapped too. Then she turned her eyes on me, cold, sharp, in front of everyone. She spat out the words that destroyed the illusion I had spent years holding together. "Be grateful you're even allowed to sit in the hall at my wedding." The laughter and chatter in the room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs creaked as people shifted, uncomfortable. Her words hit me harder than any slap could. Years of paying, of planning, of funding her life, all dismissed with a sentence. I was not a father, not even a man deserving of respect. I was a tolerated guest. I glanced at Ashley, waiting for her to correct her daughter, to defend me, to say that's your stepfather, the man who made this possible. But Ashley's lips pressed together. Her silence was her answer. I saw Nora's face crumple. Josh's fists clenched at his sides. My children knew. They had always known. And in that moment, they saw me humiliated, stripped bare in front of everyone. The guests looked away, embarrassed. No one spoke. Madison laughed lightly, as though her cruelty was just a joke, just teenage sarcasm. But I heard the truth, the venom. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the receipts, the invoices, the endless proof of how much of myself I had poured into her future. My chest burned with shame, anger, and a clarity I had never felt before. Respect cannot be bought. Love cannot be forced. Sacrifice without recognition is nothing but slavery. And I realized Madison had declared war. Ashley had chosen silence. Riley had chosen mockery. And my children were watching me, learning what a father allows. I had one choice left. The morning after Madison's insult, I woke with a silence in my chest that felt heavier than anger. Rage burns hot. What I felt was colder, sharper, deliberate. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself black coffee, and opened the folder I had been avoiding for years. Bank statements, contracts, receipts, proof of everything I had given. Line after line of money funneled from my account into lives that treated me as a guest in my own home. I stared at Madison's wedding expenses. Banquet hall, paid in full. Photographer, deposit sent. Music, flowers, catering, dress alterations, all of it. Tens of thousands I had poured into a ceremony where I was told to be grateful for a seat. And in that silence, I understood something. If they could erase me with words, I could erase myself with action. By noon, I had made the calls. One by one, I canceled every contract. The hall, the band, the photographer, the caterer. My name was on every document, my credit card the source of every payment. Without me, there was nothing. Finally, I dialed Madison's fiancé. His voice cracked with nerves when he answered. "Hey, Mr. Carter. Everything okay?" I didn't soften my words. "There will be no wedding. Not on my money. Not after the way I was treated." He stammered, tried to argue, but I cut him off. "Find someone else to fund it. Or walk away." By the next day, he was gone. Madison's world collapsed in a single stroke. She stormed through the house, her face streaked with tears, screaming that I had ruined her life. "Do you know what you've done? He left me because of you." Her words were knives, but they did not cut the way they once had. I had already bled dry. Ashley confronted me that night. Her eyes were wild, her voice trembling. "How could you do this to her? She's just a girl. She didn't mean it. You can't destroy her future over one mistake." I stared at her cold. One mistake? Ashley, it was years. Years of silence, mockery, contempt. Years of me paying while your children told me I was nothing. You stood by and let it happen. And yesterday, in front of everyone, she told me I should be grateful for a chair in a hall I paid for. I listened, and I believed her. Ashley's lips quivered. "You're cruel." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm finished." Madison screamed at me, her voice shrill, raw. "I hate you. You ruined my life. I'll never forgive you." Nora stepped forward then, her voice small but cutting. "No, he saved himself." The room fell silent. Madison's sobs filled the space. Riley tried to step in, to sneer, but his voice faltered under the weight of what had happened. He knew. They all knew. For the first time, my children, Nora and Josh, saw their father draw a line. Not just for himself, but for them. They saw me refuse to be erased. The fallout was immediate. Madison's fiancé disappeared completely, refusing her calls, blocking her number. She locked herself in her room, crying for days, screaming through the walls that I had destroyed her. Ashley begged, pleaded, even tried to convince me to reinstate the payments. "She'll apologize," she whispered. "She'll make it right. Please, David, don't let her life collapse." But apologies mean nothing when they come at the edge of ruin. They are survival, not repentance. Riley became quiet, his usual bravado stripped away. For the first time, he looked at me not as a stranger but as a man capable of walking away. His arrogance faltered when he realized the money, the house, the safety net, all of it depended on the man he had mocked. Madison's rage burned hotter. She screamed that I had humiliated her, that everyone at school knew her fiancé had left, that people were whispering about her family falling apart. She said she wished her real father were here instead of me. Her real father, the man who had given her nothing, the man who had abandoned her long before I arrived. I looked at her through her tears, my voice flat. "Then go find him. Maybe he'll pay for your wedding. Maybe he'll care. But don't come to me again." She crumpled at that, rage twisting into despair. But I didn't flinch, because something inside me had shifted. I no longer saw myself as their savior, their provider, their silent punching bag. I saw myself as a man who had been used and who had finally stopped allowing it. Ashley wept, saying I was tearing the family apart. But the truth was, it had never been whole. She just hadn't wanted to admit it. For years I believed patience and kindness could forge a family out of broken pieces. But all I built was a cage where I funded my own humiliation. Now, for the first time, I felt free. Respect cannot be bought. Love cannot be forced. And family cannot be built on contempt. Madison's cries echoed through the walls. Ashley's silence was thicker than ever. Riley stared at me like a boy realizing the ground beneath him had shifted. And my children, Nora and Josh, looked at me with something new in their eyes. Not just love, not just loyalty, but pride. I had protected them and myself. And in that moment, I knew the war was over. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped fighting for people who wanted me gone. The house was different after that night. Not quieter. No, Madison's crying made sure of that. But heavier, as if every wall had absorbed her fury and Ashley's silence and Riley's shame. I walked through the rooms and felt the weight pressing in, not as punishment, but as proof that the balance had shifted forever. Madison avoided me for weeks. She locked herself in her room, the once proud bride now a prisoner of her own collapse. I could hear her sobbing through the door, screaming into her pillow about how I had ruined her, how she hated me, how life was unfair. She shouted for her mother, demanded Ashley make me pay again, demanded the wedding be put back together. But Ashley had no power over me anymore. The money was gone, the contracts canceled, and I was immovable. Riley stopped mocking me. His defiance, once so sharp, dulled into silence. He no longer left his mess scattered in the living room. He no longer dared to sneer about how his real dad would have done it better. For the first time, he looked at me as though he understood what power truly was. Not the power to control with words, but the power to withdraw, to refuse, to vanish from under them and leave them holding nothing. Ashley was torn. At night, when the kids were asleep, she whispered to me, her voice raw. "David, please. She's just 16. She doesn't understand the damage she's done. She'll learn, but if you keep this up, she'll never forgive you." I turned to her in the dark and said what I had held back for years. She doesn't need to forgive me. She needs to respect me. And if respect only comes when the money is threatened, then at least it comes with truth. Because for years you let them spit in my face and told me to be patient. Now the bill is due. They will learn, or they will lose. Ashley cried, but she didn't argue again. Perhaps she knew deep down that I was right. Time did its work. Madison's rage slowly softened into something else. Not love, not warmth, but recognition. She began to see what her so-called father had never done. No visits, no calls, no money, no presents. He had been a ghost, a shadow she clung to only because it gave her a weapon against me. But ghosts cannot pay for weddings. Ghosts cannot fix mistakes. Ghosts cannot raise children. And slowly, in her silence, she realized who had. One afternoon, weeks after the canceled wedding, Madison appeared in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She stood in the doorway for a long time before whispering, "I know you paid for more than he ever did." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't gratitude. But it was the first time she had acknowledged me as more than a man to sneer at. And in its own broken way, it was worth more than any forced sorry. Riley, too, began to change. Without Madison's wedding drama to shield him, without the illusion of their father as some hero in the shadows, he grew quieter. He stopped challenging me at every turn. He began helping around the house. Not much, not enough to erase the past, but enough to show that he understood the ground had shifted. He had seen his sister's world collapse because of her contempt, and he wasn't eager to follow. My own children, Nora and Josh, looked at me differently. For years, they had watched me bend, compromise, accept humiliation for the sake of family. But the day I canceled Madison's wedding, the day I refused to keep paying for disrespect, they saw me fight. They saw me protect myself, and in doing so, protect them too. Nora came to me one night, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you for not letting them hurt you anymore." Josh hugged me tighter than he ever had before. "You showed them you're strong," he said, his voice trembling. "You showed them you're our dad." Those words meant more to me than anything Madison or Riley could ever offer. Because in the end, the only voices that mattered were the ones of the children who still believed in me. Ashley changed too. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that love without boundaries is poison. That by shielding her children from consequences, she had doomed them to despise the man who carried them. She saw the truth she had denied for years, that a family without respect is nothing more than strangers under one roof. We began to rebuild, but differently. No more blind giving, no more endless sacrifices poured into a void. I set boundaries, rules, consequences. Madison and Riley could live under my roof, but they would contribute. They would not mock me and eat my food. They would not spit on me and take my money. They would either respect me or they would leave. And something remarkable happened. They stayed. They adjusted. Slowly, painfully, they learned. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully. The wounds were too deep, the years of contempt too long. But it was change. Madison no longer smirked at me in public. Riley no longer used the word dad as a weapon against me. Ashley no longer filled the silence with apologies for me, because my voice now carried weight on its own. And after years of giving, after years of humiliating myself in the name of patience, I finally understood what fatherhood truly means. It isn't sacrifice without end. It isn't being a wallet. It isn't swallowing disrespect in the hope that love will grow where it never existed. Fatherhood means drawing lines, protecting yourself so your children can learn how to protect themselves, teaching them that love must come with respect, or it is nothing at all. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Madison will never forgive me. Maybe Riley will always resent me. Maybe Ashley will forever wish I had been softer, more patient, more willing to bleed for her children. But I do know this. My children, Nora and Josh, will grow up knowing their father was not a man to be used and discarded. They will grow up knowing he drew lines, and that those lines protected them as much as they protected him. And maybe, just maybe, Madison and Riley will one day look back and realize the truth. That the father they idolized never gave them half of what their stepfather did. That love without respect is nothing. That sacrifice without gratitude is slavery. Was I wrong? Was I cruel to cancel her wedding, to cut off the money, to let her life collapse rather than continue feeding her contempt? Or was it the only way to show them all that family cannot exist without respect? You tell me.